dividing fractions. When we divide fractions, technically just need to multiply. So if you know how to multiply fractions, you'll find this unit very easy. And we're going to start by solving these two questions that I have over here. The first one, 11 over 2 divided by 1/2. Okay, let me get my pen here. Perfect. Okay, so the first step when we're dividing fractions is we need to flip the second fraction. I'll explain what I mean by that. So let's write 11 over 2, and we're going to flip the second fraction. So instead of 1 over 2, it becomes 2 over 1. So the bottom goes to the top goes to the bottom. And now our division sign is going to change to a multiplication. All right? Okay, so we got that far. So sign changes to multiplication, and we flip the second fraction. Before we proceed, we're ready to multiply, but we've talked about reducing our fractions before we multiply. So we're going to reduce, if you look across, we can actually reduce both of these 2's because both are divisible by 2. So 2 can go into both of them. 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 2 once. So a new fraction now becomes 11 over 1 times 1 over 1. And now let's multiply the top against the top and the bottom against the bottom, which becomes 11 over 1. And we've said that any number over 1 is a whole number, so we don't need to put the whole number over 1, which means that this is the same thing as 11. 11 is the same thing as 11 over 1. Any whole number is always going to be that whole number over 1. So in this case, we can just simplify it to 11. Okay, what about this one? So we've got 6 over 7 divided by 3/10. So step number 1, let's write this out. And we're going to change our sign to a multiplication because that's what we're going to do. Before we continue though, we got to flip that second fraction so that we've got the bottom at the top and we've got the top at the bottom. So we now have 10 over 3 instead of 3 over 10. Okay, we're ready to multiply, but before we get there, let's see if we can do any reducing before we multiply. So if we look at the 7 and the 10, there isn't a number that fits into both of these. But if we look at the 6 and the 3, there is a number that can fit into both of them, and it's 3. Because 3 goes into 3 once, and 3 goes into 6 2 times. Okay, so let's rewrite now our fractions. This becomes 2 over 7 times 10 over 1. And now we're ready to multiply. We multiply the top times the top, the bottom times the bottom, which becomes 20 over 7. Okay, what about dividing with a whole number? So when we're dividing a fraction by a whole number, what do? So let's take a look at the first one here. And so we've got 8 divided by 3/4. So before we do anything, when we're dividing by fractions, we want to have everything the same. We want to have everything in a fraction. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put this 8 over 1 because we said every whole number is always over 1. Then we know that in a division, the next step is to change the sign to multiplication because that's what's going to happen. And then we're going to flip the second fraction. So our 3/4 become 4/3 because the bottom goes to the top and the top goes to the bottom. Now, do we have the option to reduce before we proceed? No, there is no number that would fit into both 1 or 4, and there isn't a number that would fit into both 8 and 3. So we're ready to continue, which means that we can multiply the top by the top and the bottom by the bottom. So this becomes 32 over 3. Okay, now let's look at the bottom. So what if we had 3/4 divided by 8? Again, the first thing we want to do here is make sure that we have everything as a fraction because we're going to be working with fractions. So we leave the 3/4 because it's already in a fraction format. We're going to leave the sign as a division first so that we can take care of one thing at a time. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put this 8/1 so that we can get it into a fraction. Okay, now we are looking at two fractions. Let's go to the next step. Now we can go ahead and actually change our sign to multiplication and do everything else that we have to do with a division. So we leave the 3/4 the way it is. We change our sign to multiplication, and now we can flip our second fraction, which is this 8/1. We can flip it to 1/8. So again, like we did the last time, do we have an opportunity to reduce before we proceed? So we'll look at the 4 and the 1. We don't have a number that would fit into both. The 3 and the 8, there isn't a number that would fit evenly into both. So we're ready to multiply. The top by the top, the bottom by the bottom. So this becomes 3/32. Okay, now we're going to take a look at mixed numbers. So what about when we're dividing mixed fractions? Okay, so fractions that got mixed numbers in it. So we're going to take a look at this first one here. Okay, and so we've got 8 2/3 divided by 7 1/2. So because they're as a mixed number, the first thing that we want to do before we do anything else is we want to convert those into improper fractions. And if you don't know how to do that, I do have another video on how to convert improper fractions into mixed numbers or mixed numbers into improper fractions. And so we begin by multiplying these two numbers, so 8 times 3, and adding the top. So we've got 8 times 3 is 24, plus 2 is 26. So let's put it actually here, 26, and the denominator stays the same. Divided by, and we'll do the same thing on the second one. 2 times 7 is 14, plus the 1 is 15, and the denominator stays the same, which is a2. Okay, perfect. Now we got two fractions. So we're ready to move on to the next step, which is, because we're dividing, we're going to change our sign to multiplication. So our first fraction stays the same, that doesn't change. Our sign changed to multiplication, and now we flip the fraction. So the 2 goes to the top, and the 15 goes at the bottom. Okay, perfect. Now we take a look and see, do we have any opportunity for canceling or reducing the fraction before we actually proceed to multiply? And so we see that if we look at the 3 and the 2, we don't have a number that would fit into both. What about the 26 and the 15? No, there really isn't a number that would fit into both. So we're ready to multiply. So we would multiply the top against the top and the bottom to the bottom. So in this case, we have 52 because 26 times 2 is 52. And then 3 times 15, we've got 45. And so this is our total. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. So we've got 1 2/3 divided by 3 1/3. So once again, we've got mixed numbers here, and we want to convert them into improper fractions before we actually divide. So we do that by multiplying the bottom times the whole number, so 3 times 1, which is 3, and we add the 2, so that gives us a 5. So we've got 5/3 because the denominator stays the same, divided by, and the same thing here, 3 times 3, which is 9, plus 1 is 10, and the denominator stays the same. Okay, now we can start our division, which means that we leave the first fraction the way it is, we don't touch it. We change our sign to multiplication, and we flip our second fraction. So this becomes 3/10. So before we proceed, we look at our fractions and we ask ourselves, do we have an opportunity for canceling or reducing this further? And we can. If we look at across, the 3 goes into both one time. So 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 3 once. And when we look across this way, The 5 goes into 5 one time. The 5 goes into 10 two times. So we can rewrite our fraction, and it would be 1 over 1 times 1 over 2, which equals 2. When we multiply now the top times the top and the bottom times the bottom, we get 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 2 is 2, which is 1/2, and we're done.